Chapter 7. To reach Varanasi, I boarded a train to Delhi. Through my window, I watched as the plains of India spread out before me. Expansive fields, some barren and others lush, were plowed by pairs of oxen or buffalo, and followed by barefoot men clinging to the plows. Gradually the scenery turned to villages, then towns, then, accosted by the smell and taste of diesel fumes, we entered New Delhi. Horns blared, truck engines roared, and people crowded everywhere. Hawkers yelled, children shouted, and money changers struck deals. The Himalayan forests were now far away, replaced by a polluted city teeming with a population of millions. Wandering near the fountain at Connaught Circus, I heard a shout, "Monk, I can't believe it!" A moment later, a blonde-haired traveler ran up and grabbed my hand. It was Sean, a traveling friend who kept a small Canadian flag plastered to his backpack. We had met at Piccadilly Circus in London amid the counterculture. Happy to see him, I was nonetheless coming from a whole other world, and I was ill-prepared for the encounter to come. As we spoke, Sean's language, mannerisms, and interests seemed so crude and uninterested. What was happening? I politely listened as he gossiped about people we knew, his views of world politics, places where he got high, and his bouts with dysentery, even down to the detail of the texture of his stool. I wanted to run away. Less than a year ago, I enjoyed his company. Why was it so different now? Had he changed? I took a deep breath and suddenly realized that it was I who had changed. Until this meeting with an old friend, I couldn't fathom the degree I had changed. In Sean's company, it felt as if I had transformed into a totally different person. For a moment, it was startling. I felt dizzy and my limbs trembled. I realized that I had to be more balanced in dealing with a world that had been so familiar, yet was now so foreign to me. As Sean rambled on, I looked within. There I saw again how the association and environment we choose can mold our character down to the fundamental views of life. Nearby, the massive fountain gushed a constant stream of water high into the air. Reaching its peak, each drop of the water fell down and splashed into the pond. Watching, I prayed not to fall into the vicious trap of becoming judgmental. Because of my unconventional choices in life, I had been on the receiving end of judgmental attitudes time and again, and couldn't live with myself if I did the same to others. Still, that tendency to criticize was so strong. I might no longer agree with Sean's ideas or ways, but why shouldn't I respect him as a soul that originated from the same divine source and carry on with the life I now held as sacred? All these thoughts flowed through my mind as I carried on the conversation. After some time, Sean invited me to join him for lunch. I politely excused myself. "It's been great meeting with you, Monk," he said with an enthusiastic handshake. "It's been enlightening meeting with you, Sean." From that day on, whenever I passed through New Delhi, I stayed at the Hanuman temple near Connaught Place, in the company of sadhus. Continuing my journey to Varanasi, my train stopped in Agra, home of the Taj Mahal, One of the luxuries of riding third class was that one could impulsively get down anywhere and later jump into another train heading towards your destination. How could a person stop in Agra and not visit the 17th century tomb glorified as one of the wonders of the world? Entering the massive outer gate, I beheld a long pool of water lined with cypress trees. On both sides were flower-filled Persian gardens. At the distant end of the pool stood the Taj Mahal, with a backdrop of blue sky and the river Yamuna. Moving closer, I admired the hand-carved white marble inlaid with semi-precious jewels, both inside and out. While resting in a garden, I read a booklet on its history and learned that a Mughal king had the monument built when his favorite wife died, and that it was meant to be her tomb. Taking 22 years to complete and 20,000 workmen and craftsmen, the monument was finally completed in 1648. Legend told that the hands of the gifted craftsmen were then severed to assure that there would be no duplication. In his later life, one of the king's own sons usurped the kingdom, exiled or killed his brothers, and imprisoned his own father. Looking up from the book, I tried to make sense of it all. After constructing magnificent palaces, forts, mosques, and the Taj Mahal, the king was conquered and imprisoned by his own son. In the confines of prison, he suffered miserably while his family battled and murdered one another. I reflected. Such is the pitiful consequence of greed for power. In the heart that harbors the weed of selfish greed, the flower of love cannot survive. To conquer one's envy, lust, and greed, now that is truly monumental. I continued my journey to the ancient city of Varanasi, named Benares by the British. Glorified through the holy scriptures of India by the name Kashi and considered by millions of Hindus to be the holiest of all cities. It was especially dear to those who worship God as Lord Shiva. I wandered over to the Ganges. The sun was rising. Ancient stone steps called ghats extended in both directions, leading down to the river as far as my eyes could see. Tens of thousands of residents and pilgrims were gathered to perform their ritualistic bath. Clouds of incense smoke wafted toward the heavens. Cymbals chimed, bells rang, horns trumpeted, drums beat rhythmically, flutes emitted sweet melodies, and stringed instruments droned sacred ragas. Countless flowers and garlands were offered into the river's current. In all directions, people chanted songs, hymns, and mantras, which merged together in tribute to the Lord. The worshippers wore their most colorful saris, turbans, and garments to honor Mother Ganges. Merchants set up hills of bright red, yellow, green, orange, and blue powders along the steps with dozens of large umbrellas shading them from the day's sun. Devotees offered incense, flaming lamps, conch shells, cloths, jewels, and fans. In the river, throngs of worshippers offered prayers, oblations, and rituals as men, women, children, cows, buffaloes, goats, monkeys, and elephants took their baths. Sacred food was given freely. Carts everywhere sold snacks and religious articles. It was a grand festival of religious fervor. Entering into the contagious enthusiasm of the crowds, I took my morning bath. Afterwards, I visited the temple of Kashi Vishwanath, an ancient temple at the heart of Varanasi. According to the scriptures, Lord Shiva and his consort goddess Parvati once resided there. Throughout history, saints, kings, and common people made pilgrimages to this temple, which so outraged a Mughal conqueror that he destroyed it and built a huge mosque in its place. At that time, however, the Hindus had hidden the deity of Lord Shiva, and later they established it in a new temple. Now, once again, tens of thousands came to worship each day. One day while exploring Varanasi, I heard the sound of wailing women. A funeral procession was passing through the narrow alleyways leading to the river. The corpse lay on a bamboo stretcher decorated with flowers and was carried on the shoulders of loved ones. Walking behind the body, men were soberly restraining their emotions, and behind were women sobbing uncontrollably. Seeing their suffering, I was affected. I followed along behind and approached the funeral pyre to observe the final rites. It was so different from anything I had witnessed in the West. There on the burning ghats of Varanasi, I contemplated the mystery of death, the same mystery that philosophers have struggled to comprehend for millennia. Praying to gain deeper insight, I made a decision. From sunrise to sunset, I would sit on the bank of the Manikarnika burning ghat to meditate on the inevitable reality of death. Many Hindus believe that it is a great fortune to die in Varanasi near the Ganges, for it is said that Lord Shiva comes and whispers the name of Rama, the Supreme Lord and source of eternal pleasure, in the ear of the dying, thus assuring liberation from the cycle of birth and death. For this reason, many pilgrims come to Varanasi at the end of life. Sitting in a place just overlooking the burning bodies, I observed the relatives and friends as they were forced to see the reality of death face to face. After a chanting and crying procession through the streets, the body was placed on a pyre of wooden logs and then decorated with sacred objects to the recitation of prayers, mantras, and sacred texts. To conclude the last rites, the eldest son or closest relative walked around the body, sprinkling it with Ganges water, then touched a flaming torch to the pyre. The burning of the body signified the release of the spirit, and the flames represented Brahma, the creator. The fire then began its work. Its flames raged higher and higher as black smoke drifted toward the heavens. At this point, many of the mourners offered a final prayer, bathed in the river, and departed. But I remained, carefully observing the final moments of the corpse. The hair sizzled into nothingness. The flesh shriveled away. Organs melted and bones crumbled. Gradually, the flames devoured the entire body. In the end, nothing remained but a pile of ashes. These were then carefully swept into the current of Mother Ganges, the final resting place. Such was the grand finale of a person's life. In the background of it all was the sweet song of Mother Ganges, calling us back to an eternal reality. At times in her song arose the Hare Krishna mantra, which I chanted while reflecting on death. In course of time, the body would be placed in the earth or fire. If the body is really what friends and family members love, then why do they destroy it? I thought, it's not the body that people love, but the soul. The body is a temporary vehicle. Without the soul, the body is like a car without a driver. I see through my eyes, smell through my nose, taste through my tongue, hear through my ears, feel through my skin, think through my brain, and love through my heart. But who am I? Who is the witness, enjoyer, and sufferer that activates my body? I contemplated this question while witnessing body after body preparing to enter into the holy river. Regardless of race, sex, nationality, education, wealth, or religion, in due course, all bodies will be carried away by the river of time, the ultimate equalizer. Sleeping on riverbanks or under trees and begging for some cheap grains to eat, this was the life I had chosen. Except for the times I succumbed to dysentery, I was in fair health. The cloth given to me in Rishikesh, which I still wore, had gradually faded and tattered. My hair had grown longer. My feet were calloused and scarred from roaming the jungles, fields, villages, and cities barefoot. All I carried now was a wooden begging bowl, a walking stick, a cloth bag filled with books, and the religious picture I had bought with my last money. My heart soared with joy because I believed so deeply in the goal I pursued. Life was a school, and I had become its eager student. Something inside pushed me forward to see more and learn more. Something inside probed me to wander from place to place, person to person, not letting me settle down. Who or what was that something? I believed it was God, the presence who throughout my life had always been with me, whom I prayed to as a child, feeling him so distant but so close, whom I shamefully betrayed again and again as a teenager, and whom now I longed to know and to love. In Varanasi, I heard of another holy place of Shiva, Pashupatinath, where it was said that on one particular night one's prayers were sure to be fulfilled. Both the promise and adventure thrilled me. I traveled about 250 miles northeast by train and on the rears of trucks to the Kathmandu Valley in Nepal, where thousands of pilgrims flocked to the temple of Pashupatinath. Being a foreigner, I was rejected entry. But I had come so far and was determined to worship that night and pray for a blessing, to find my way to God's love. At much risk, I covered myself with sacrificial ashes and entered. It was a profound experience that also had me questioning the foundations of my faith and my direction in life. The next morning, I set out to cross back into India. I was heading about 200 miles south of Pashupatinath in the state of Bihar to Bodh Gaya, the holiest place on earth for Buddhists. 2,500 years ago, Prince Siddhartha Gautam, escaped the luxuries of his royal palace to seek a solution to the sufferings of birth, old age, disease, and death. For 6 years he lived as an ascetic, enduring self-inflicted pain, starvation, and exposure to the elements, all in pursuit of liberation. Realizing the limitations of that path, he ultimately came to Gaya, where he sat in the meditative lotus posture under a peepal tree and vowed not to move until his goal of enlightenment was attained. Like Satan's temptations to Jesus in the wilderness, Maya, the power of illusion, tempted Siddhartha with every possible pleasure, but he remained fixed in his resolve. Under this sacred peepal tree in Bodh Gaya, he became the Buddha, the enlightened one. From that time on, the tree has been worshipped as the Bodhi tree, or the tree of enlightenment. Under the Bodhi tree, I studied books on Lord Buddha's teachings and gratefully meditated from sunrise to sunset. Meditating under the Bodhi tree, I felt that a flow of dynamic energy was lifting me out of my body and mind into space. In the 1960s, authors like D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts were popularizing Zen Buddhism in the West. I had studied some of their writings and found its simplicity and directness appealing. When it came to my attention that a Zen master from Japan was teaching the way of Zen in Bodh Gaya, I was excited to have the chance to attend his lectures. About 15 students, half Indian and half Western, assembled in the meditation room. Eagerly anticipating our first sight of the master, a bell rang, and the revered Japanese teacher entered. His head was shaven, and he wore long, flowing black robes. Carrying a bamboo rod in hand, he slowly sat on the floor, back erect. A shaft of sunlight highlighted his striking features as he addressed us. "I will be your master. Your master will teach you the original way of Zen, as it has been passed down from a long tradition." The rhythmic way he spoke had a hypnotic effect. "The source of all suffering is desire," he began. "And desire arises from the mind's attachments to the senses. Freedom is to empty the mind of all thoughts. To have no mind or thought is satori, the liberated state." His eyes shut tightly in concentration as he explained that Zen is to understand the meaning of life directly, without being distracted by logical thoughts or words. "You are Buddha," he said, "but you must discover it yourself. All beings are Buddha, as ice in essence is water," he recalled. The great D.T. Suzuki has written that the practice of Zen means a life of humility, a life of labor, a life of service, a life of prayer and gratitude, and a life of meditation. He then described his method of discipline. "Your master will be strict, and you must obey every word and observe silence at all times. Yes?" Everyone nodded. He began to lay down the law. "You must pay no tribute to the senses, no sex, no intoxications, no games, and no music. You will eat only when and what your master gives you." The new students began to squirm, while the seniors reassured them. He continued, Your master will teach you with koans, paradoxical puzzles that will liberate you from rational thought. Your master will teach you kinhin, walking meditation, and zazen, sitting meditation. There will be 3 sessions of group meditation or zazen every day, 1 to 2 hours each. You will be absolutely still. Any motion will be corrected by the punishment of your master's rod. Folding his hands on his lap, he then taught us a technique to empty our minds by sitting and concentrating on the intersection of the floor and the wall. Nothing else. When your master rings the bell, you begin. You will end only when your master rings the second bell. In the first evening session, my shoulder ached, so I moved it slightly. Whack! The bamboo stick lashed my shoulder. I never moved again. Anyone who moved was disciplined with the bamboo rod of chastisement. As our limbs ached and mosquitoes feasted on our blood, the whack of wood against flesh was quite common. Finally, we were saved by the master's bell. All the students surrendered to the point of shaving their heads. Everyone but me. I did not have the heart to commit my life like the others. I just didn't feel the conviction or will to do so. When the 14-day course ended, I thanked the master and departed. I felt the regimented lifestyle he demanded and the almost constant meditation to be a good experience. But there was something I couldn't name in the experience that made me suspicious. Some days later, just coming out of meditation under the Bodhi tree, I met a young American couple, 2 of Master's faithful followers. When I asked how they were, the woman began to cry. "You won't believe what happened after you left the ashram," she said. I can't imagine. Under the Bodhi tree, I braced myself. With a long, heavy sigh, she sat down next to me and began her story. Late at night, Jonathan went outside to use the toilet. He happened to see something very, very strange. Rubbing her eyes, she paused to collect her emotions. "Do you remember Pam, one of his American disciples?" I nodded. Well, she was entering the master's quarters. She came out nervously hours later. The next few nights, Jonathan hid in the banana grove to watch. To his dismay, he observed the same thing. When he broke the news to us, well, we felt we just had to interrogate her. Pam admitted the truth. Master was having a full-on affair with her every night. The young woman sobbed into a handkerchief and looked up at me again. We were betrayed. A sinking feeling came over me. She continued, relating how they had tested Master by secretly putting LSD in his tea. Under the influence, he revealed himself for what he was. You should have heard him. He went berserk on a complete ego trip. She deepened her voice and shook her finger in my face in imitation of the Master. You must obey only me. I am the enlightened one. All others are frauds. If you dare to question my words or actions, you are doomed. She finished by saying that all his disciples had left him. my heart pained. I lamented hearing such news about one of my teachers. After my American friends departed, I tried to make sense of it. The Zen master had been extremely strict with his students, but not with himself. He had misrepresented a long tradition of sincere teachers. Unfortunately, such hypocrisy stains the image of all the world's great traditions. I pondered. An irresponsible leader can break the hearts and faith of his followers and raise suspicion even toward those who are genuine. What pain his hypocrisy caused to those who trusted him, and just see what it has done to his own life. How essential it is to live what we believe. How vital it is to practice what we preach. Throughout the scenic terrain of Bodh Gaya were scattered temples representing the various Buddhist nations of Asia. I wandered the countryside visiting these sanctuaries. In the peaceful setting of the Burmese Bihar or temple, I met Satya Narayan Goenka. A year or so before, this teacher had come from Burma to teach an ancient technique of meditation. He invited me to attend a 10-day course beginning the next day. Moved by his sincerity, I became his student, along with a dozen others. Goenkaji, as we called him, became like an affectionate father to all of us. His silvering hair was neatly parted to the side, and his clean-shaven face radiated peace. A blue-checkered cloth called a lungi was wrapped around his waist, extending to his ankles, and he wore a white button-down shirt. As he sat in a cross-legged position, Goenkaji shared with us the story of his own life. Born in 1924, he was from an Indian family that settled in Burma to pursue business. Although he attained great wealth and prestige, he was quite miserable, suffering migraine headaches and mental anxieties. He told us in 1955, I came in contact with my revered teacher, Sayagyu Uba Khin. The experience changed my life, and I learned from him for the next 14 years. His teachings represent a tradition that traced back to the Buddha. He explained, the Buddha never taught a sectarian religion. Rather, he taught Dhamma, or Dharma, the way to liberation. He taught us that vipassana, which means to see things as they really are, was one of India's most ancient techniques of meditation. He continued, it was rediscovered by Gautam Buddha more than 2,500 years ago and was taught by him as a universal remedy for universal ills. Goenkaji spoke about his teacher with immense gratitude. Although Uba Khin was a householder and not a monk, he mastered the art of practicing and teaching vipassana. To fulfill a great dream, he blessed me to bring vipassana meditation back to India, the country of its origin. In Goenkaji, I found a man of honesty and integrity. He was easy to trust. His teachings were simple and direct. 3 times a day we had group meditation, and each evening he lectured. Through this meditation, he said, you will learn to observe life within and without. to witness it with neutrality, detached from the conceptions of pleasure and pain, success or failure, and happiness or distress. In this way, the mind gradually finds more and more subtle states of peace, and from peace, compassion awakens. Each day in the mid-morning, I had private discussions with Goenkaji, and we became very close. With sincere concern, he extended himself to each of his students, and he asked nothing in return. His powerful presence and conviction sheltered his small following. At the conclusion of the 10-day course, he invited me to attend his upcoming courses in Bombay. I agreed to meet him there. For several days, I practiced vipassana under the sacred Bodhi tree from sunrise to sunset, and prayed to the temple's golden Buddha for blessings. From Bodh Gaya, I traveled northwest to Sarnath. It was in the Deer Park that Buddha inaugurated his preaching mission. There I studied the Bodhisattva vow, in which one follows in the Buddha's footsteps by making one's life a sacrifice of compassion for those who are suffering in the illusions of the world. While contemplating this virtue, I decided to travel to Calcutta to seek the blessings of a selfless soul of whom I had heard so much about, Mother Teresa. I traveled east by train to the Howrah station in Calcutta. Struggling through the crowds, I wandered on to the Kali Ghat on the bank of the Ganges. It was early morning as I walked to the temple of goddess Kali, a form of the compassionate energy of Lord Shiva, who in particular destroys evil. Swarms of people crowded on the entrance lane. Shops displayed pictures of the sword-wielding goddess with her long tongue hanging down. Shopkeepers yelled out, "Jabamala," while holding up blood-red garlands of hibiscus flowers. Each trumpet-shaped red flower, which was dear to the goddess, had 5 petals and a long, drooping red stamen protruding from the center, resembling the pictures of Kali's tongue. Incense and jewelry were stacked up in overcrowded stalls, while piles of milk sweets, flowers, coconuts, and red powder were aggressively sold as offerings to the goddess. Deafening music blared from speakers as pilgrims, shopkeepers, and beggars collided. Lines of lepers, widows, and the lame sat staring at the passers-by with hands stretched out, crying for charity. I wanted to give them something to alleviate their misery, yet I had nothing to offer but a sad smile and my prayers. At the entrance gate, amid shoving and chattering, hundreds of people were streaming in and out of Kali's temple. I was not prepared for what I was about to witness. Across from the goddess's altar were sacrificial altars stained with blood and flesh. Squealing frantically, a black goat was being lifted by the legs as its head was inserted between bloody staves. Bare-chested and chanting mantras, a priest swung a large, wide, curved knife down and swack, severed the head of the goat. Blood spurted from its neck. A lifeless head, its eyes looking into nothingness, fell with an eerie thump to the ground, while its body was immediately taken away for cooking to feed the poor. Nauseated, I rushed outside to the bank of the Ganges struggling to make sense of it all. What a striking contrast, I thought, between the bloodshed I see here and the peaceful sages I lived among who follow the same Hindu religion. I grappled to understand the apparent contradiction. Approaching an old sadhu who was reading a book and leaning back against a jackfruit tree, I revealed my dilemma. "Years ago," he began, "I was a priest in such a temple. With the sacrificial sword, I severed the heads of many animals, but repeated nightmares began to haunt my sleep." "Can you tell me about them?" I asked. "Yes, the goats I killed would invade my dreams. First, I saw them screaming in misery. Next, staring with vengeful eyes, they gored me with their horns and lacerated my flesh with their teeth. Then, a monstrous priest with a man's body and goat's head thrust my head onto the altar and severed it with my own chopper." Slapping his book shut, the man leaned back onto the tree. "I couldn't take it any longer and quit my duties as a priest to accept the life of a sadhu." My eyes wide, I listened. "In every religion," he said, "people interpret scripture and follow particular practices according to their own level of realization. For those who seek the essence, the path is selfless service and meditation on God. For attaining higher material enjoyment and reducing sins, increasing piety is recommended. But for those who crave material boons, there are varieties of practices such as the sacrifice you observed. The Vedas are said to be like a desire tree, wherein we can find a path to fulfill whatever we seek. Kali is the merciful goddess of nature and is worshipped in different ways by different kinds of people. But despite all they do in her temple, the goddess Kali is a vegetarian." I gazed into the river's current. In the West, I reflected, millions of animals were slaughtered behind the scenes, invisible to the eyes of society. Here, at least, those eating meat witnessed the truth of what was required to provide for their diet. Up until this day, I had been thinking that examining many faiths would broaden my understanding and spirituality. But this incident gave me a deeper understanding that without a mature guide, apparent contradictions in every tradition could seriously bewilder me. As I walked along the bustling streets of Calcutta, my heart throbbed with anticipation for my next destination. Honking cars vied with one another for every inch of the road. Trucks revved and roared, blaring their horns. Hundreds of bicycles and motorbikes clamored together. Sweating and straining, barefoot men tugged rickshaws, taxiing whole families. Oxen huffed, dragging overloaded wagons. Dogs, cows, buffalo, and sheep roamed about, not stopping for anyone, while a swarm of pedestrians pushed and shoved amid it all. I arrived at the convent of Mother Teresa, a simple one-story building where a Catholic sister received me with a modest smile. "Welcome to the missionaries of charity," she said. How may I serve you? Joining my palms in respect, I appealed, is it possible that I may have the honor of meeting Mother Teresa? Follow me. We'll see if it's possible. She led me into a simple chapel. This is our prayer room. Mother Teresa and the nuns perform worship here. I knelt down and offered a prayer. When I stood up, she led me out of the chapel and down a hallway. As we passed a dimly lit room, she exclaimed, "There is Mother Teresa performing her daily chores." I looked in and saw Mother Teresa scrubbing a large charred cooking pot with her own devoted hands. My heart melted. "Mother," my guide said, "this is Richard, an American sadhu. He would like to meet you." Mother Teresa greeted me with folded palms. "I pray to be forgiven for keeping you waiting, but may I first finish my service?" "Of course, Mother," I replied. The sister then led me into a small room, offered me a seat, and told me that Mother would come after washing the pots. In a few minutes, Mother Teresa entered the room and sat on a chair a few feet from mine. Although her aging form was shrunken and frail, I could feel her indomitable presence. Her face was furrowed with wrinkles from a life of austerity, yet her eyes twinkled with childlike innocence. Although activity swirled all around her, she still had time for this insignificant soul. From her tender voice emerged the words of her heart. She said, "The greatest problem in this world is hunger. Not hunger of the stomach, but hunger of the heart. All over the world, both rich and poor are suffering. They are lonely, starving for love." Her gaze opened my heart to her every word. Only God's love can satisfy the hunger of the heart. There is no other solution. She waved her hand in dismissal of her own work as meager. Feeding the stomachs of the poor is not so difficult. Feeding the starving hearts of humanity with God's love, that is the great challenge. You see, our hearts must be pure to give that love. Her dedication to the mission of Jesus Christ was like an ocean. Her every expression was like a wave in that ocean. She continued, "Poverty is not only lack of a piece of clothing, but a lack of human dignity and the beautiful virtue of purity. Poverty is a lack of respect for one another." Pressing her heart, she sighed, "When the impoverished people of Calcutta die in my arms, I see in their eyes a light of hope. I do not see this light in the eyes of many of the wealthy, powerful people of the West. Real wealth is in the hearts of those with faith in the love of God. The world is in desperate need of those who will give the poor-hearted this hope." Other visitors entered the room just then. One British woman asked Mother, "Why do you wash the pots? Is there not someone else who can do this?" Mother Teresa looked warmly on her interrogator. "Serving God and humanity is an honor, not a chore. Any type of service to God is a blessing. There is no high or low," she said. "But Mother," the woman's husband inquired, "where do you get your strength from?" Mother Teresa held up her rosary. Then she said something I had heard from many holy people from many traditions say, All my strength comes from the Lord's holy names. She turned to me and spoke. If you are humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know who you are. God is our witness. Never be disheartened by any failure as long as you have done your best. Her words penetrated deeply. Before departing, the British woman thanked Mother Teresa for her great work. It is God's work, Mother Teresa replied. I am only a tiny instrument. She then excused herself to scrub more pots. Mother Teresa was born in 1910 in Macedonia from an Albanian family. At 17, she dedicated her life as a nun and was soon after sent to Calcutta to serve as a school teacher and later principal at St. Mary's. But in 1948, a momentous event took place in her life. She heard her calling to serve the poor in the slums of Calcutta. In 1950, with only 12 assistants, Mother Teresa established the Missionaries of Charity. Over the years, her selfless service has attracted thousands to assist her in God's work. At my request, the sister brought me to the shelter for the sick and dying. I felt so helpless to do anything for them, but I did perform some simple service, sweeping and carrying utensils. Soon after, Mother Teresa appeared. Her presence lit up the dismal room of misery and death with hope and joy. As she held the hand of a woman ravished by disease, she smiled tenderly. The woman was transformed, her eyes illuminated with a joyful sparkle as she smiled back at Mother Teresa. The mother then went to each and every bed, not out of duty, but out of sincere affection. One emaciated man, coughing blood and rapidly declining, felt her hand upon his head. He looked up at her as if she were an angel who had come at his greatest hour of need. Bowing his head, he smiled. God's love is with you, she spoke tenderly. Remember him in gratitude. To a dying woman alone and rejected by her loved ones, Teresa offered comforting words. If you sincerely want to love God, you must learn to forgive. The burden of the woman's heart was lifted. Mother Teresa's love for God included all people as well. In her humble, unassuming manner, she gave the miracle of hope and joy to everyone she touched. Hindu, Muslim, Jew, or Christian, all were treated with equal affection. At one point, Mother turned to me and said, I see my beloved Jesus in each of these poor souls. My Lord is mercifully accepting my love through them. Mother, I said, feeling shy in her presence, they see the love of Jesus in you. Mother Teresa beamed back at me. Isn't that a miracle of God's love?